Now let's add our dynamic hair curve into the IK rig to get more of a dynamic motion to our polyp tentacles. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the visibility of polygons using the show menu. Then I'll select tentacle A control curve and set both show clusters and show joints to 0. That turns them off so they're not in the way. I can now select my IK handle curve. I wanted to point out a one small change that I made to the scene. I took the IK handle and I renamed it Tentacle A IK handle, and I placed it in a group called IK handles. That way I can easily turn off the visibility of the IK handles in the scene. So as I add more and more IK handles to the scene, I'll be renaming them accordingly and putting them into this group. So I'll select my IK handle curve. Let's find it here in the hierarchy. It is parented to polyp spine joint 5 and is called Tentacle A IK curve. So we have that selected. Let's go to the nDynamics menu set and choose nHair Make Selected Curves Dynamic. When I rewind the scene and play, we don't see much happening. So we have to test to make sure that it actually worked. The first thing we can check is the outliner. We see that now we have a nucleus node, which has been added to a scene, and hair system 1. Let's call this, rename this polyp hair system. The nucleus node is going to control the overall dynamics for the scene. The hair system node is going to control the dynamics of the hair in the scene. So kind of the quality of the hair and how it reacts to the forces established by the nucleus node. That's a good way to think of it. And we also have hair system 1 output curves, and this is our actual dynamic curve. Let's keep things organized, and I'm going to rename this curve. Let's call this Tentacle A Dynamic Hair. And let's also make sure that we spell dynamic correctly. Okay. So if we wind and play the scene, we don't see much happening. You can kind of see that since I have Tentacle A selected, if we zoom in here, it's that light green curve, and it's probably a little bit hard to see, but if you zoom in, you can see it's jiggling a little bit. So what we need to do is we need to edit the point lock of the hair, because right now both ends of our dynamic hair are locked to the ends of our start curve, or IK curve. So that means that the hair is not moving very much. So to edit the point lock, we need to go to the follicle node. Let's rename this as well, Tentacle A follicle. Tentacle A follicle selected. Go into the channel box. If we look under Tentacle A follicle shape, we can find the attribute called point lock right here. It's the fourth one down. I'll set this to base. You can also find this in the attribute editor by selecting that follicle shape node, and it is up here at the top, right here, point lock, set this to base. Either way, it does the same thing. If I rewind and play the scene, you can see that our Tentacle A dynamic curve, which I had now selected and is light green, is wagging just a little bit. So it's definitely a dynamic hair now. I'm going to edit its behavior just a little bit to make it more obvious. I'm going to select our polyp hair system shape node. Again, let's make sure we spell these correctly. Polyp hair system node. I'm going to go to the stiffness scale, and I'm going to lower the overall stiffness scale. So this is a graph here, and this represents the stiffness of the dynamic hair along the length of the curve. This is the base of the curve. This is the tip of the curve. So if I create a shape that looks more like this, you can see that it's going to be a little bit stiffer at the base and then gradually drop off to almost nothing, which is going to give us kind of a more of a floppier behavior. I'm also going to increase the damp a little bit, so it feels a little bit more like it's underwater. Let's set damp to 0.25. I'm also going to add some turbulence. I'll set the intensity of the turbulence to 0.25. Let's increase this a little bit more. There we go. Now we kind of have a nice underwater motion to our curve, at least to begin with. This is something that we can continue to edit as we set up our scene, and even when we start animating the scene, we can go in and tweak these settings to get the behavior that we want. But that's a good starting place. So I'm going to select my control curve here. Let's turn show joints back on. And as we might expect, the joints aren't doing much right now because the joints are being controlled by the IK handle, and the IK handle still has the original start curve set up as its end curve. So now we need to swap the end curve between our dynamic hair and our original starting hair, that IK curve. So let's open up the node editor. I'm going to click on the little eraser button here to clear the graph. We need to select a few nodes here. So I'm going to expand follicle, tentacle A follicle. I'm going to select tentacle A IK curve. Actually, let's expand this and select the shape node of that curve. Let's select the IK handle itself. So I'm expanding the IK handles group. Control select in tentacle A IK handle. And then I'm going to go down here to tentacle A dynamic hair. Select our tentacle A dynamic hair shape while holding the control key, and then I'll press add to graph, and I'm going to expand these nodes so we can see what's going on. This looks complicated at first, but once we get everything selected and expanded, then it's an extremely easy thing to edit. And of course, after this, we'll be setting up a shelf button to make this process even easier. So it looks like there's a lot going on. Don't worry, it will get a little bit easier. So we can see world space of IK curve shape is connected to in curve of tentacle A IK handle. So all we need to do is go to tentacle A dynamic hair shape, expand this, click on world space, and then just replace the connection. So now we have tentacle A dynamic hair shape, its world space attribute is now connected to in curve of tentacle A IK handle. And if we hide the node editor, rewind and play the scene, voila. And I'll turn on polygons, and what we can see is something that's starting to look like a living thing, kind of, sort of. In the next chapter, I'm going to go through the process of setting up some shelf buttons for all of those steps to make it a little bit easier and faster. Because again, we're going to have to repeat a lot of that for these other tentacles as well.